Hi everyone, my name is Holly Stoneberg and I'm the Education Program Coordinator for Portage Park District, and I want to welcome you to this program on the Bats of Ohio. I do want to do a quick shout out to our summer intern Hannah for all her help putting this slideshow together. If you don't already receive the newsletter, I'm going to pause for a little bit to give you a chance to do that. You can either go to the website where you signed up for this program, or you can use that QR code right there in the bottom. You'll want to do that because the newsletter is the first place to learn about all the things going on in the park. And it's especially helpful when we have programs with registration limits because you'll be the first ones to find out about it and therefore the first ones to sign up. While you're doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about our mission in the parks. So our mission is to conserve Portage County's natural heritage and provide opportunities for its appreciation and enjoyment. Just like tonight, hopefully you walk away with more appreciation of the bats that call Portage County home. Our park district manages over 2,700 acres throughout 6 open parks and 3 multi-purpose trails. Our funding comes from a 10-year half-mil levy that was passed in 2014, but we also receive funding through multiple grants, as well as the support of our wonderful Portage Park Foundation. So hopefully I paused long enough to give you enough time to sign up, and now you'll be in the know for all of our Portage Park District happenings. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, let's just pause and think about our opinion of bats. So I know there are a few of you on here that love bats, but there might be people who are a little uneasy with bats and uncomfortable with the thought of them, right? They do get a bad rap because they fly at night and are seen alone. They live in caves, which can be creepy, and they're also associated with vampires. They've been called flying mice before, and rodents don't always get a good rap either. But bats are wonderful creatures, and they're really great for the ecosystem, right? They don't get tangled in people's hair, they're not aggressive, and very few of the parasites that they carry are actually harmful to humans. So hopefully throughout this presentation, I can tip your opinion towards the positive end of the spectrum, and you'll come out liking them just a little bit more because they are extremely beneficial and they're fascinating little creatures, right? They are the only mammals that are capable of sustained flight. So how cool is that? What are bats though? The easiest way for me to explain this is to go through their levels of organization. When we talk about taxonomy, that's the branch of science that helps us organize and classify things. And it's going to help us know what a brown bat is and what a bat is not. Okay, so if we start in the most inclusive unit, that's the kingdom, they are animals. If we go to phylum, they're categorized under Chordata because they have a backbone. And they're in the class Mammalia because they share all the same characteristics with all the other mammals. Like you, me, whales, your cat, your dog, they're all mammals because they're warm-blooded, they have hair, they give live birth, and they produce milk to sustain their young. If we move down to order, this is where we start separating out even more. Okay, so they belong to the order Chiroptera, and this is where we separate them from rodents. Remember, they've been called flying mice before, but they're in completely different orders because the mice and the rats are in Rodentia, and here we're in Chiroptera. It's Greek for hand wing, and as we look at their anatomy later, you'll see that they do have hand bones within their wings. And all bats in the world belong to this order, whether it's the little brown bat that has a wingspan of 10 inches or the giant flying foxes that have a wingspan of 5.5 feet, they're all in the same order. If we go down to the family, there are 18 different families in the world, but all of the Ohio bats belong to the same one, Vespertilionidae, and we know Vespers comes from that Greek word meaning for night. And I do want to make a little note here showing you that as we look at these different scientific names, you'll find that a lot of them have night or kind of creepy meanings to them, right? So that kind of shows you how people felt about bats as they were naming them and throughout history. The genus is Myotis, right? So we're getting more and more specific. Myotis means mouse-eared. And then for this one specifically, the little brown bat, it is the species Lucifugus, which means light fleer. So if you put its whole name together, its scientific name is Myotis lucifugus. What that translates to is mouse-eared light fleer. Okay. Like we said before, bats are the only mammals that are capable of sustained flight, and that's because they have these wonderful evolutionary adaptations that allow them to do so. So if you look at this picture here, their arm is very similar to a human arm, it's just been adapted for flight. So they do have the normal arm bones that we have. They have a humerus, the radius and the ulna below the elbow. They have the carpals in their wrist joint, and they have all of these phalanges down here that are just really long finger bones. But you'll see that they have this patagium, which is the membrane that connects all of that. Okay? So like all things that fly, whether it be a bird, an insect, or a bat, or an airplane, right? They need thrust, but they also need surface area to support that flight. The wing is going to provide the thrust, but that patagium is what provides the surface area to allow them to stay in flight. Okay. If you look between their legs, you'll find a uropatagium, and that acts as like a stabilizer to help them steer. And we'll find later it helps them catch food as well. So even though that's really helpful, the wings alone are not enough for flight. When we look at bats, their bones are lighter and thinner than other mammals. They're not as light as birds, but they are relatively light compared to other mammals. And you also need to be able to keep flying. So hearts of bats are 3 times bigger than other mammals of the same size, and their lungs are bigger as well, because you're going to need a lot of a strong cardiovascular system to keep you flying. Another thing that makes bats stand out is the fact that they can hang from things. There are a couple of ideas to try to explain this. Right? So since they're flying, their bones needed to be lighter, and maybe the thinning of leg bones took away the ability for them to support their weight, so they couldn't stand anymore, so hanging was just easier. Another idea is that in order to be protected from predators, they would enter caves where the only safe spot was really on the walls or the ceiling of the caves, so they had to adapt to hang on to those. And also hanging upside down allows you to see predators and prey below you a lot easier. So there's a couple different ideas as to why bats do this. Their ability to do this is one of the most interesting things for me. So if you think about the long bones in their legs, right, they have the same long bones as we do, like the femur and tibia and fibula in the lower legs, but those long bones are rotated 180 degrees. So their knees are actually facing the backs. And if you look at the picture of this, on the left, you can kind of see it, right? So if you look down its body to its legs, you'll see where the femur extends from the furry part of its body, and you'll find its knee. And if you look closely, you can see the knee would bend backwards. So to kind of put that in perspective, it's like if you were laying flat on the ground and your legs rotated so that the soles of your feet face upwards. And if you were to bend your knees, your feet would go up towards the air, right? It's very odd to think about, but that's what allows them to hang there so well. Another thing that helps them is the fact that their toes are locked into place by tendons. So it takes no energy from their muscles to hang like this. I read something that was kind of funny. It said a live bat can hang just as well as a dead bat because it's just the way their toes are situated that allows them to hang like that. And one misconception that I've come across is that all bats live in caves, which is not true, right? In Ohio, we don't even have true cave bats because in order to be a cave bat, they have to live all year long in the cave. But our bats that we have here in Ohio, if they use a cave at all, is usually to hibernate in the winter. So one thing with bats that people are usually familiar with is the fact that they use echolocation for hunting. But it's not all they use, right? Bats do have eyes and they can see well for short distances. But when we're talking about hunting and navigating at night, echolocation is their main tool. So with echolocation, they're going to emit a high frequency call that's going to go out into their surroundings, hit objects that are around them and bounce back to them. And they interpret the sound waves that are being reflected back to them. So it's thought that their brain interprets these sound waves the same way that our brain interprets the light waves that give us vision. Okay? It takes in the waves and it makes an image so that they know exactly where predators, prey, or obstacles when they're flying are around. They use it to find food and water, and then when they're fighting in the air amongst themselves. But what's impressive is that we all know they can catch the insect out of the air, but they can even locate an insect on a leaf and grab it off a leaf and fly away, which is something I didn't know they could use echolocation for. So the bats in Ohio are insectivores, meaning they eat insects, right? We don't have any blood-sucking bats. We don't have any fruit bats here. They do eat the insects. They use echolocation to find their food. So they're going to swoop in and catch it if it's in the air with, remember, that uropatagium, okay? So that skin flap that's between their legs, they're going to use it as a little net as they're flying through the air. And as they're flying, after they scoop it with the uropatagium, they're going to kind of lean over and grab the insect with their mouth, and like you would imagine, that would cause them to do somersaults throughout the air. Okay. When we talk about insects, most of them are made out of, or most of their parts are made out of chitin, right? So if you've ever stepped on an insect, you've heard it crunch before. That's because of that exoskeleton that's made out of chitin, which is a structural carbohydrate. And for the most part, that's indigestible. But bats do have this relationship with this specialized bacteria in their gut that allows them to break it down. So they can eat the insects with the use of this bacteria. But why eat it if it's not going to give you any nutrition? Okay, so even though they can break down the parts that they do swallow, a lot of bats actually pick off the parts that they know aren't necessary for them. So they're going to clean them up before they eat. So the bats will pick off the wings or the antenna because those don't provide any nutrition to them. One thing that I found really interesting when learning about bats is that when I was growing up, I was told bats are really helpful because they eat mosquitoes and they help control the mosquito population. And that's actually not true. So they do eat mosquitoes if they catch them, right? But it's not a main part of their diet. That's because mosquitoes are really small and it takes a lot of energy to catch each one individually. So why would you spend all that energy catching a low energy reward when you can go out and get something nice and juicy like a moth, right? So, but that's right. We talked about that when we talked about conserving bats. But there are other reasons, right? Just because they don't eat as many mosquitoes as we thought they would doesn't mean we still shouldn't care about them, because they eat lots of other things. And other reasons for conservation is because of the things that they do eat, like the cutworms and the beetles and the weevils that are really big crop pests. I always thought bats were interesting because of their flight and echolocation, but the more you study bats, the more interesting they become. And one of those examples is their reproduction. So bats will mate in the fall and then go into hibernation, but they don't get pregnant right away. So after mating, they have delayed fertilization. So what that means is that the females will store the sperm until she ovulates in the spring. So they're holding that sperm throughout their entire hibernation period. When she ovulates in the spring, she'll release the sperm, controlling when fertilization happens. Scientists think that this is to improve reproductive success because that's one less thing that the females have to worry about after hibernation is finding a mate. And it also gives the babies a greater chance of survival because food sources are now more readily available. When we talk about bat gestation, or how long they're pregnant, that's usually about 40 days for the bats we find in Ohio. Comparatively, a mouse of the same size only gestates for about 21 days. So if you think about it, you know a longer gestation allows for more development and a larger birth weight, which generally leads to more successful babies. Okay, but if you think about a small bat having a bigger baby, it's kind of a weird concept. So if we go back to our example of little brown bats, they give birth to babies that are a little over a quarter of their size. So to put that into perspective, if we had a woman who was 150 pounds give birth to a baby of the same ratio, that baby would be 38 pounds, which is incredible to think about. So they're tough little critters. So even though bats are interesting, right, that doesn't mean they come without their threats. When we talk about natural threats, there are actually no predators that regularly feed on bats in Ohio, which is weird because you'd think they're a small animal, right? They would make a nice snack for any animal. But if you think about the organisms that are out at night, the most common one would be an owl. But owls usually use the sit and wait method, and that's not going to work for a bat that's flying around. And there are other things that do capture them, like maybe a cat or a snake or a raccoon that might have a chance encounter with them, but they don't catch them regularly enough to be considered their big predators. Their big predators, or their biggest threat rather, are humans, which we all probably could have guessed, right? So if we build roads over the waterways where they drink and where a lot of their insects are coming up from, if we use insecticides, which is killing their food source, if we are destructive to their roosting or foraging habitats, all of these things are going to decrease our bat populations. Some other things that happen are we've been seeing an increase throughout the country of these wind farms, right? And if you have a giant spinning blade in the air, that's not really good for things that are regularly flying throughout the air. And sometimes even fishing wire. So if people go fishing and maybe their line gets caught in a tree, if they can't get it loose, a lot of times they'll leave the line there, and bats can get caught up in that. And with everything else, there's diseases that are going to hurt the bat. And the one that we're talking about most often now is the white nose syndrome. So this was first observed in New York in 2006. Scientists went to a cave and they found this fuzzy white substance all over the bat's muzzle that later turned out to be a fungus. And since 2006, it's estimated that nearly 7 million bats have died from this. So we know our bats are hibernating in caves. And remember why they're hibernating, right? So it's low temperatures outside and there's lack of food. But when this fungus starts growing on their nose and sometimes on their wings, it itches them and it wakes them up out of hibernation. And if you're awake during hibernation, that's not a good thing because it's in the middle of winter and they don't have food or water, so these bats are dying from starvation or dehydration. When they studied it, they found that this spreads from bat to bat, but there's also some conversation about how humans are involved, because if humans are walking into caves and then leaving the caves, they could be taking the fungus out on their boots and then taking it to other places. And it's hard to track because bats can spread it during migration, and even if it kills all the bats in a cave during hibernation, the fungus can still linger within the cave and then come out again if more bats try to hibernate there the next season. And I put this image in here just to show you the range of it, right? So we started in New York in 2006, and this is even an old one, so it's probably even further, but within 10 years it spread throughout most of the country and has killed, like we said, 7 million bats, right? Because of all the things we just talked about, it is obvious why bat populations are in decline, but bats are super beneficial and deserving of all the conservation efforts we can give them. It says here that 1 million bats could eat 1.3 million pounds of insects a year. So if each Ohio county had just 15 colonies of bats, and each colony consisted of just 300 bats, they would eat over 8.3 billion with a B insects each year. So think of the money that we can save just on insecticides alone if we supported our bat populations. Another reason is bat guano, right? And if you don't know what guano is, it's bat poop or bat manure or bat scat, right? And it's one of the best manures out there. So it has higher nitrates and different elements in it that are better than our standard manure that we would get around here. It's so useful that it used to be called black gold, and people would go harvest it, but they found that the people that were harvesting it weren't being so nice to the bat populations, so it's not used as much anymore unless you have bats in your area and you know where they roost and you can go get the bat guano yourself, right? But high-level guano extraction is not happening anymore, but it is really great for the garden. To finish out, we're going to end with the types of bats we can find in Ohio and just a little bit of information on each one of them. So bats are a little interesting to talk about because we don't really get to see them, right? Unless you might have had one in your house, or if you stay up late at night and you see them flying around, we don't really come in contact with bats a lot. So you might see things on here that you've never seen before. But I wanted to give you a little introduction to what's going on in Ohio. Let's start with the hoary bat because it's the largest species in Ohio. Its name, hoary, means gray or white, which you can see from the tips of its fur. And it is a very furry bat because even its Europatagia, that skin flap between its legs, has hair on it as well. But I think they have very nice looking fur. Our silver-haired bat has the white tips on its fur, giving it kind of a frosted appearance. But it is one of our slower flyers because its wings are more adapted for long migrations and not so much quick flights around. Its scientific name there, you can see the species name is Noctivagans, which comes Nox for night and Vagans for wanderer. So again, with the scientific names, its name means night wanderer. Right. Here we have the little brown bat, but I don't know how that name is helpful because most of our bats are little and brown. So the name isn't really that helpful. The way scientists tell if it's a little brown bat and not other similar species is they catch them and look at them closely. So they have hair that extends past their toes, and in their ears they have this skin flap called a tragus that is elongated, and that its use is to help them with echolocation. And we actually have a tragus, right? It's that inner part of your ear that kind of juts out right over our ear canal, and sometimes people get it pierced, but little brown bats have a relatively larger tragus. Our northern long-eared bat is also in the Myotis genus along with the little browns, right? And their ears extend past the tip of their nose when they're laid forward, so their name is well deserved. But they're one of the species that was hit the hardest with white nose syndrome, and their populations are down by 95%. The Indiana bat, this one's been listed as endangered since 1967, but when you look at how we're treating the earth, it's kind of obvious why. So their species name is Sodalis, which is Latin for companion, and that refers to these tight clusters that you see when they live together, right? But if we're reducing habitat, we don't allow them to cluster like that, so it's no wonder why their populations are in decline. Another thing that I like about them is that they're one of the species that are going to use shagbark hickory trees to roost. So they go up under the shaggy parts of the bark and have their babies there. So whenever I see a shagbark hickory, I wonder if there's a bat in there. We have our tricolored bat, and this is the smallest bat in the Midwest. It's called tricolored because if you look at like a single strand of fur, it's darkest at its base, lightest in the middle, and the very tip of the hair is the medium shade. And these are so small they can be mistaken for moths. Our big brown bat is the second largest species in Ohio, and they're most commonly seen because these come out a little bit earlier. So if you're out just at the end of dusk and you see something flying around and it's a little bit larger, then it's most likely a big brown bat. We have our eastern red bat, named that for its red fur, and these are one of our bats that are going to migrate south for the winter. And they hibernate in tree trunks, and what I found really interesting about them is sometimes they'll even hibernate in the leaf litter. So scientists have found that they'll go underneath the leaves that fall in the fall and hibernate there throughout the winter. So just another reason to leave the leaves. Our eastern small-footed bat, this is thought to be the rarest bat in all of North America, but they're generally hardy species because scientists have found them at the entrances of caves, and as you can imagine, those are the coldest part. The evening bat, it's hard to see in this picture, but they do have a hairless muzzle, and they are the only one of this genus to be found in the US. And their numbers are in decline as well. And that's it. I feel like we rushed through those little bat descriptions, but hopefully the next time you look up, you can take a guess as to what species you're looking at. If you have any questions, I encourage you to email me, hstoneberg@portageparkdistrict.org, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation of the Bats of Ohio.